Do I have to do that all again?
Just give me a brief.
The cliff.
The clip notes. I'm Monica Marlowe, the 2015 RPG Superstar.
I am Lynne Hardy. I've been doing this probably longer than I'd care to admit to. The very first thing I got published was a bit in the Mort source book for Slay Industries. Then I did a lot of stuff for Dying Earth in the Excellent Prismatic Spray. I did a standalone campaign for them, which was Fields of Silver. I then went back and did a bit of research science for a while, because that was my background, was biomedical research. Gave that all up as a bad job a few years ago to professionally write full-time. So the last few things I've been doing, I created an introductory steampunk role-playing game called Cogs, Cakes and Sword Sticks, which is published third-party by Modiphius. I was the line manager, lead writer and editor for their Act on Cthulhu Kickstarter. I've just edited Blue Rose for Green Ronin. I am now enslaved to Chaosium, writing a big, gigantic campaign for them, which will be out hopefully sometime next year.
Awesome.
I'm Kiel Chenier. I'm from Canada.
Never mind, pet.
They all speak English here.
So I run a blog called Dungeons and Donuts. I self-published a D&D adventure called The Hell House Beckons. It's a haunted house adventure because I thought most D&D ghosts and haunted houses kind of suck. I also have a book coming out from Lamentations of the Flame Princess, hopefully before the end of the year. Kind of waiting and seeing. The book's done. We're just waiting on art. It's called Blood in the Chocolate. If you know the Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, it's the same thing except with a lot more sort of horror, sex, and death.
Yeah, Roald Dahl was a strange person.
Oh my God.
You need a golden ticket.
All right, so the panel we're at is entitled Exploring the Creative Process. And the purpose of this panel is because everybody creates differently. Everybody comes up with their ideas in different ways. They get over burnout in different ways. And they decide what kind of ideas they want to keep and get rid of in completely different ways. And I love getting into people's heads and asking them how they do that to get better ideas for me so that I can continue to be a good creator. So I'm going to ask them a couple of questions, and as you guys, if you have questions, pop your hand up, and as soon as I get a moment, I will have you guys answer. Okay, so the first question that I'm going to ask each of you is, it's going to be kind of broad, but where do you get your ideas from?
Well, mine was easy. The very first thing I ever wrote and the very first thing I ever designed was actually my RPG Superstar contest-winning item. I did not want to be a game designer. My husband was a game designer, and I supported him, but I was always a role player on the other side of the screen. So, I mean, I've gamed for 20 years. I came to gaming before I met him, and so he was starting to do freelance, and the freelance publishers were like, so Monica, when are you going to write something? And I was like, I'm never going to write anything ever. And they changed the first round of Paizo's RPG Superstar contest to not wondrous items, which I have no need for wondrous items. I'm not a wondrous item kind of person. They changed it so that we could make weapons and other things, and so I had an idea for a weapon. I made it into the first round, and everybody's like, oh my God, Monica, you're going to win. I'm like, no, I'm not. I've never designed anything in my life, and so then I won. It was kind of unfair. I was between jobs. I'm a nurse in my other life, and I had a contract job that ended, and I did not have a new job lined up. So for approximately 6 weeks, I was in my own self-imposed prison, boot camp of game design. I lived and breathed game design, sometimes 60, possibly 80 hours a week. I would get up in the morning, the kids would go to school, I would get up, I would start breaking open books, I would work on what rules, it was very grueling, it was exhausting, but at the same time, it was probably the most rewarding thing I've ever done, because I never believed I wanted to be a writer, I never believed I wanted to be a game designer, and people come up to me and they're like, hey, will you sign my book? And I'm like, wow, so I was wrong, people like my ideas.
You
said you started hitting the books there and just like breaking open books. Were you reading like theoretical stuff or just other games?
So,
reviewing how they set up their rules.
one of the nice things about RPG Superstar is you're only writing for Pathfinder. And 2015 was I believe it was the 8th contest run. So what I ended up doing was, I had already played Pathfinder for many years, so it was a game that I was very familiar with as a player. And what I looked for was things that I felt that there were spaces that did not fill what I liked to play in. I looked to fill those gaps, and that's actually how my weapon ended up in the final 32, because it filled a gap that it's called the Spectre Blade, really quick. It was a weapon specifically for clerics, but anybody could use it. And what it did was allowed the entire party to be able to fight ghosts. One of the most aggravating things being a player is sitting down at the table playing the cleric, which I always played because I'm a nurse. I'm typecast. And being in a situation where only one player can engage the enemy, that is the most unsatisfying part of any game, is when one person is crushing the enemy and everybody else is like, hey, so you guys want to go play some like zombie dice over on the other half of the room? And that's not really fun. So I created a weapon that allowed the entire party to fight ghosts, and I guess it resonated with a lot of people. So what I did then, and if you do look to create for Pathfinder specifically, what I did was I went through the back contests and I looked at the reviews that people were given. I didn't actually look at their items because I didn't want to have like taint, but what I did want to see was what the judges were looking for. And so I basically read reviews. I read very critical reviews of what other people had to say about what was out there. And I recommend that if you're going to be a game designer and you want to write in a specific area, do the research to find out what other people are saying and what they feel needs to be, because that's where, if other people feel like there's a hole that's not being filled, what you want to do is fill that hole.
That's pretty brilliant.
No, that's absolutely.
Yeah, that is what you have to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really good.
Yeah, I mean that was some of the stuff for a project that is upcoming for a system I will not name. I've gone through and looked to see what isn't there, and I've pitched that because it's something that should be there but they haven't had chance to do yet.
Right.
So I'm pitching for that, but it's hush hush at the moment. I can't tell you what it is, or I'll have to kill you all and take that home with me.
We like you. Please don't do that.
I am British and ruthless. Allegedly.
It's perfect.
We get the roll for save.
I have D6s in my ears.
I have tentacles. It's on.
Yay! Handbags at dawn. It depends on who you're working for. Obviously, if you're creating something to do a pitch for a company, they haven't specifically asked you to do something, you do that. You go look to see what they've done, what sort of things that they like, where you think there might be gaps that need filling. If someone comes to you and says, I want this, then you make sure you do that. That's one of the things, having sort of been a line manager and an editor as well. It's very frustrating when you give someone a brief and then they disappear off and do something completely different. So that's just sort of a professional courtesy thing as an aside. But a lot of the stuff I've done has been historical based. So you hit the history books first. You go and you have a look at sort of like what was going on in the real world. And it's surprising how little you actually have to make up in the end. Because there is seriously weird stuff out there that all you have to do is just tweak it ever so slightly or take one step to the left, and it is perfect. And for Call of Cthulhu is absolutely amazing. The thing that you do have to be careful is not to disappear down the research rabbit hole. It's very, very easy to go, oh, just one more book. Oh, that's really cool. I should go read about that. And you just do have to stop yourself and go, no, I can keep that for next time. I will come back to that another time. But I have notebooks all over the house which are just full of my handwritten notes. I'm a bit old-fashioned that way. And then I type them up as I need them to sort of get them fresh in my head. But yeah, it's mostly historical research I do to sort of ground the game, because it's easier to sell the lie if it's grounded in reality.
Yeah, I would definitely second that in terms of ideas for TRPG stuff. Definitely draw from history. One thing that I feel like you maybe shouldn't never think, don't draw from other RPG stuff. Unless you're writing specifically for a source book and everything and you need to know that world, draw from other places. Because there is, especially in medieval fantasy games, there are so many of them and they are so very derivative of each other. And go elsewhere, like look to history, look to current events. My big thing is in terms of ideas and stuff, I went to school for film and television production. I worked in VFX for a couple of years. I've directed and produced stuff in the past. Like film was my entry point into like creativity. Like I was a screenwriter for a number of years, and I've done a lot of stuff behind the camera. And basically like watching, and not just sort of fantasy films and everything, but like watch just a store of different movies from over, or like across the decades and everything, because there are wonderful stories that are there. Like you will never run out of ideas if you just have a store of films available to you. And another thing you can do, this is something I learned from Max Landis, is this wonderful thing about flipping the premise. You take a movie premise and you flip the perspective of it, like the perspective of the characters and everything. It works really well for games as well. Like, imagine a game where you are, say medieval fantasy, say Dungeons and Dragons. One of the adventures starts, you've been hired by constabulary of a kingdom. There are two people that are sort of eluding justice. They've been moving across the countryside, disrupting people, robbing people, and they seem supernatural. Like these are sort of larger than life figures, everything, and they just seem to be getting away. Like they're being, and that's the thing. Like you are being tasked with like bringing them down, and as you're sort of like following their trail and everything, you find you're not the only ones going after them. And then you run into other people. It's like, well, do you work with this other group of people? Well, no, they're kind of like, hateful bandits and everything that have sort of, are out to them because they were played themselves. That's just Blues Brothers from the other perspective.
Or Supernatural.
Yeah, or that.
Yeah, you can run into demons and make devil packs and.
The nice thing about tabletop games is they're malleable enough that you can get ideas from anywhere, and you can still kind of make them work.
Yeah.
So that brings up a question then, and it's going back to something that Monica said about she doesn't want to taint herself too much. So there's some things that I do this too a lot, where I'll decide to do something like ConTessa, and I won't look at a lot of what other people similar to this is doing, so that I can make something new and different. So at what point in time do you decide that I shouldn't read this or look at this because I might bring too much of it into what I'm doing? And at what point in time do you decide I need to read all of this and consume as much of this as possible? Which also kind of goes into, when do you stop researching, almost?
I stop researching when I feel like I have somewhere to start, and I go back to researching when I feel like I've got stuck.
Yeah.
I mean, I have something that off the wall. I knit. On my business card actually says I am a stunt knitter, and I have knit monsters for third-party publishers. I've knit some of their creatures for them, but knitting is really kind of my thing. Game design is just something I do when I've got nothing else going on. And so we had a couple of months ago, there was a power outage in our neighborhood, and we almost never get power outages because we are on a grid with a nursing home. So our power is almost always back on very, very quickly. We were 16 hours without power. We did not know what to do with ourselves. So, it's dark. I'm in the dark. I've got candles lit. I'm knitting by candlelight. And I said to my husband, "Oh my God, this is what the post-apocalyptic world must be like. I finally, I make jokes. I've got a post-apocalyptic skill I can knit. I've got more wool. We'll always be warm. What will we do?" And he's like, "Oh, my post-apocalyptic skills are coming in handy here." I said, "I'm Mad Monica, the Wool Warrior." And so I posted about that on Facebook, and someone's like, I would buy that. And I was like, oh my God, you would not. He's like, oh, I would totally buy that. And so another third-party publisher had already asked us to, my husband and I, to consider doing some post-apocalyptic settings. And I was like, oh, okay, so now so I'm thinking, it's something I will continue to think about and work on, and I have a pattern already for the book, a la Debbie Macomber. I mean, I'm totally going to go with this, but it's just one of those things where I sat down, I started writing some stuff. I started writing some like cheesy one-liners, but you know, I started watching the Mad Max movies again and other post-apocalyptic. Post-apocalyptic dystopian is totally the genre that I most associate with. Even though I love fantasy and sci-fi, I really enjoy the psychological twists that go into dystopian literature and dystopian movies, because we're always just one step away from that. We are always what happens when people go bad. And so, so sometimes inspiration comes in just the weirdest places, especially when someone says, I would pay to see that in print. I was like, okay, so I can make some money off of this. We're going for it.
Yeah, it depends again. It's down to the individual project. When I was doing Acton Cthulhu, I did not look at any of the World War Cthulhu stuff. It's a lovely premise. Now I'm not doing Acton Cthulhu. I will eventually find the time to read World War Cthulhu. But obviously I wanted Acton to very much have its own flavour that wasn't influenced by what they were doing. But if you're working on something where it has to be grounded in that world and that universe, then you do have to read everything. You need to know it to make sure that it fits. If you've got a good line developer and editor, they will help you with that. They're going to point you in the right direction and pull you back if you're re-going over the same territory somebody else has already covered because you've missed something. And with most big systems, you cannot possibly know everything that's already been before you. So you are relying and collaborating with other people on that. You do kind of know when you've done enough research. And that's usually you feel comfortable, things have started to make those sort of synergistic connections on their own. The research has shown you what direction you're going in. The one that I'm writing for Chaosium now, I originally had an idea. It was research I'd done for Shadows of Atlantis that never got used. And I thought, oh, it could be this. And then I started doing research in the areas, and it was like, no, actually, this really gruesome thing is appearing all over in all these different areas that I'm looking at. It's kind of like, no, it's got to be that. The research is telling me it has to be this thing. So that other stuff's gone out the window again. I will get to it at some point. But then you come to write it, and it's like, what you think you've done enough research, but then there's always that gap when it starts to flow, and you have to go back and just fill in those little gaps. So, yeah, you kind of know, but then you usually still have to go do a little bit more. But if you are struggling for ideas, that is the danger point, when you just keep going because you haven't found it yet.
Yeah. So is there like a point though when you're doing that, you're like, I still can't, that you just scrap the whole thing and start researching something new altogether?
There's a thing that I do a lot because with the books that I've made and the books that are coming out that I've made and everything, there's a point where I'll come across some really good ideas. I mean, so stuff that I've written for Lamentations of the Flame Princess, that takes place in the pseudo-real world 17th century. So I had to do a lot of historical research because a lot of that stuff is sort of grounded in the reality of those times, but there's also like horror and supernatural stuff, and like occasionally there are fantasy race things in there. I would do everything where I would be researching something, and then I would come across like this historical event or this idea or this concept, and I would think, oh, that's awesome. Okay, you know what? Make a note of it, make sure you have that information somewhere, and then come back to it later. Like, make sure you kind of stay focused on what you feel like you need to get, but also keep making those sort of side notes of like, this is really cool, come back to that later.
Yeah, no research is ever wasted.
Yeah.
I mean, something you'll eventually come to a place where you're like, oh, 5 years ago when I was looking into, the Underground Railroad, and I came across this great story of slaves being freed, and now I'm writing about Pathfinder and there's actually a slave, the Cheliax has slaves, that would be a tie-in. It'd be like, oh, this is a great story of what really happened, and it's a first-person narrative of a slave who was rescued or was helped to freedom, and being able to make that kind of you want to pay homage to it. You don't want to whole cloth steal it, but it's something. It gives you that perspective. And then you have that perspective that you would not have otherwise had. But, you did that research 5 years ago, and then all of a sudden you're like, this is that place. I knew this place this time would come.
So like save everything.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
I mean, yeah.
Any audience questions?
This is a question where I have an answer, but I'm hoping for more complication.
Yeah.
We can do that for
when
you.
I write, when I work on a project, I always run into a place where I'm just like, oh, how do I keep going? And I know that the answer is just keep going. That's not always.
Like, sometimes you need to walk away from it for a bit. Sometimes you do just need to let your brain decompress, because if it's all you've been doing, your brain does get tired. It stops seeing those connections. And it is quite handy sometimes to just walk away, maybe for a week, maybe for 2 weeks. Go do something else. Give your brain the holiday. Because it'll just be ticking away in the background there without you thinking about it. And then when you come back, and then when you come back to it, you'll see things that you've missed.
I have a sort of a different answer and everything. When you're outlining whatever you're, whether it's an adventure or a book or a story and everything, do the ending first. Make sure you have the beginning. Make sure you have the ending. This works for me. Everyone's different in their creative process. But when you have a clear conclusion, like if you're writing an adventure, make sure you know that sort of penultimate scene, or like the room in the dungeon or an area that's like, they'll probably get to this last, beating this portion of it ends the adventure. Have that done before you do most of the other work, because everything along the way will get easier because you know what you're leading to.
So one of the things I do, and I learned this from my time as a gamer, and I used to LARP. I would have soundtracks for my different characters so that when I was going to an event, I would have to be in the right mindset to portray a person. So I would have soundtracks for people. I would wear specific clothing, and I would wear specific perfumes. So all of my NPCs in my game Down the Blighted Path, which I had to do a pitch basically. So I did have like kind of a rough outline. It was more of a skeleton. I had the top, and I had I had the beginning, and I had the end, and then I had this nebulous in the middle. Something was going to happen, and then you were going to get to the end. So what I did was I started to think about, well, what would my characters be like? What are my NPCs going to be like? I actually, when I did it, because there's always read aloud text, that's the thing I engage most with as a player, and as a game designer, I had no idea what I was going to do. So I actually wrote my read aloud text for every room. I did some of my map. So after I had the beginning and the end, and I wrote, and I had sort of a feel, I wrote all of my read aloud text. So I knew kind of what, as a player, I was going to be walking into, what my players would be walking into, and I based it on what kind of feel is that room going to have. And so if you've not gone over, they have been nominated for an Emmy. It is Adventure Sense. And if it had not been for the wonderful lady who made all of these, some of them are nasty smelling, but they're little scent beads, and they smell like wizards' towers. They smell like deserts. They smell like woods, cave. I mean, anything you burning battlefields. I mean, they are not perfumes. They are things to invoke your sense of smell. And so I would have specific smells. Some of my characters wore specific perfumes, so my husband would be like, "Oh, you're writing about so and so today because you're wearing that perfume," and I would be like, "Yes," And I mean, I would even kind of maybe just dress up a little bit so that I could get into that mindset, because for me, it's about being able to tap into that portion of myself, because that's all I have. I only have my own experiences and the things that I have front loaded, and I do the same thing you do. I front load a lot of stuff. And then I walk away from it. And then in the back of my mind, there's this, wonderful writing kitchen that starts cooking things, and the stews start to get yummy, and things. So engage as much of yourself as you can, because you need to touch those different parts of your brain, and the only way to do that is through sense of smell, sense of touch, listening, for hearing, seeing, and stuff like that. Go for a walk, because that also starts bringing in new inputs. Even if it's your neighborhood, you'll see something, you'll be like, oh, you might see a flower and it's orange, and you're like, and it'll click. It'll just bring out that whatever part your brain's been working on, and it'll click. And you'll be like, oh, always take a notebook with you and a pen or paper and write it down, because when you get home, if you're like me, you'll be like, oh, I saw something that was really awesome, and now I forgot what it was.
So I would actually second that, absolutely. Like, most of my brainstorming happens, like, I jog in the mornings and then I walk in the evenings and everything, and I have it. If you're working on TRPGs or just any creative process, like, have one of these or one a little smaller than these, like, with you at all times. Because, yeah, like, I'll go for a jog and everything, and I'll come up with ideas, like, as, physical activity and everything kind of spurs that for some people. So, and then occasionally I'd be, like, halfway through, and I'm like, okay, stop at Starbucks, write for 15 minutes and everything, keep going. That way you have it and you don't forget it and everything. It helps.
There's also a thing, if I say rubber duckying, does any of you know what that means? Programmers use this a lot. It's when you speak, when you talk to somebody, you engage a different part of your brain than when you're just thinking about something. Yeah. So what programmers will do a lot is, I'll have a problem and I can't figure out how to sort it out. So they'll go to another programmer, and in the process of explaining the problem, the solution will present itself.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So, so sometimes just sit down and talk to somebody about what it is that you're doing, and your brain will work in different ways, and it'll help you out. And then usually you do that, and the other programmer just sits there and nods and nods.
Like, I have no idea.
Yeah. And then at the end, then you say, oh, I've got the idea. Thanks for all the help. And like, I could have been a rubber ducky. That's why it's called rubber ducky. And I actually used to have a little rubber ducky that I would sit above my computer that I would talk to every once in a while.
Ooh.
So yeah, engage all of your senses and talk and use your brain in different ways.
Yeah, and talking to different people can just sort of, like, as you say, it's not just that it makes something click for you, mm-hmm. because if it's the whole thing with teaching. Mm-hmm. If you don't understand it, then you can't explain it properly to somebody else, and it may well be that you haven't quite got it sorted in your own head what it is that you're doing, and the act of actually explaining it, they may be able to help you where they're not understanding it, so that will push you in the right direction. But just helping to get that out there, to clarify it for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I've done that so many times where I do it. You can even do it. I do it like on Messenger and Facebook and stuff like that. I have a few people that I trust that won't break, because we all sign NDAs, and we'd hate to have to kill you all. And I'll just start typing it up, and I'll be like, I have a question. They're like, okay, what's your question? I type it all up, and then I just delete it. And I'm like, okay, I figured it out. Thanks, bye. And they're like, okay, great. I'm glad I can help you.
No, I think this young lady here.
I had a somewhat similar but different question, kind of going along with that. One of my main problems is finishing something. So, like, there's a little different from, like, I don't know, I'm stuck. It's like, I've lost my motivation, and so do you have any suggestions other than I have a deadline to meet?
Oh, that's a good one.
That's a great
It
one.
is a really
That's,
good
one.
yeah.
But when you're self-publishing,
do you have any strategies for motivating yourself to finish something that you've started?
So actually having the end written really does help, because then we have what we call, and I will give him the shout out in case anybody in podcast world is listening. Owen Casey Stevens calls it Death March to Deadline. And sometimes you really just have to, if you like, and I see you're knitting for the players at home, I am like, I can't knit until I write 1,000 words, or I can't knit until I finish this. And I really just hold myself hostage. I love playing video games, and, Fallout 4 came out, and then I was like, ah! So, I reward myself. I sit down and I say I have to write 500 words, or get a section done, and then I let myself play a video game, or, eat, sleep maybe. But that really, sometimes you just have to hold yourself hostage to the commitment that you made to yourself.
And again, sometimes it may just be if you've lost your motivation, you do just need to wander off and go do something different for a while. Get that spark back.
The thing that I find really helps is structure. If you're able to impose a certain amount of structure with your work and everything, like before writing anything, like, okay, because we're primarily talking about tabletop role-playing games and writing adventures and role books and that kind of stuff. In your document and everything, like, title all of like the chapter headings and everything, or title all of the important points in the adventure, your conclusion, your introduction, your background area, your room breakdown and everything. You will lose motivation and get frustrated on writing part of it. But maybe there's another part down the line that's like, yeah, I could probably write that. I can't write like what happens in the story. I can't really find the motivation to write what the background is or this. I could probably bang out a few monsters. I could probably come up with like, oh, what kind of items are in this room? Okay, let's make this room.
Yeah, change your pace.
Yeah. If you have trouble with that and everything, one of the great things for writers and everything is like if you're not great at structure or you're having trouble with it and everything, have someone else do that. Have someone else remind you. Like find a friend or someone else online that you trust or that is, good about reminding you and stuff, and just get them to sort of like every so often like, hey, there's this. Maybe try this. Like, just something to sort of keep you on the path. And of course, like, do sort of take breaks if you're feeling kind of burnt out and stuff.
Yeah.
You had a...
I was wondering if you ever mind map.
Mind mapping.
Yeah. Like, I'm real big into, like, outlining stuff. Like, again, case in point, I got this some bitch right here. Anytime I do any kind of project, I do a lot of illustration on the side. I don't know if you guys can see this and everything, but, like, I will jot down like all kinds of portions of an adventure beforehand, like vague ideas, note taking, like what leads to what, character sketches and stuff. Like before I start typing like a Google Doc or like a Word doc and everything, when I'm actually coming up with it, most of it will live real loose and real fast in a notebook first. Absolutely.
I think you best engage your brain by writing rather than typing. I made it through college by taking almost verbatim notes and then never studying again. And it was just because that was just the way my brain worked.
Yeah.
I mean, it won't work for everybody, but if I sat down in class and I engaged and listened and wrote and saw, I could pretty much nearly identically bring up, if someone asked me a question in class about what was going on, I could open my notebook and say, there it is.
Yeah, that's exactly the same for me. I've got a semi-eidetic memory, which is one of the other reasons why, if I'm working on certain things, I don't look at other people's stuff, because I do remember it. I won't necessarily realise that I've remembered it from somewhere else, so I do have to be very careful with that. But yeah, if I've written it down by hand, I can go to the notebook, I can find which page it's on, and I might not necessarily remember exactly what I've written, but I know where it is. But just to help remind me, because, I mean, certainly when I'm doing big campaigns, I try to do all the research beforehand. And sometimes it can be a year between me doing the research and actually coming to start writing the thing. I then type it up to remind me of the important bits a bit at a time, just to refresh that.
Yeah.
Kyle, you mentioned about structure. Most of what you guys have been saying so far it sounds to me like it's one project at a time. No?
No, not always,
wow.
no.
Well, that leads to my question. I am at a point where I think of 2 or 3 projects that I would really love to work on at once, but I lack the discipline to organize myself to prioritize which one I want to do first, in what order, what sounds cooler. Is there any...
Is the goal for like that publishing it and selling it for money?
More than one of them, yes.
Okay, if yes, pick one. Doesn't matter what one. Doesn't matter which one you think is best, just any of them. Get something done. Because again, like it's, having ideas is fantastic, and they happen all the time. And especially if you're typing or writing them down and everything, you will never run out of them. There will always be a plethora of like things that you could do. And maybe this is just sort of like the hardline screenwriting stuff and everything, but like it doesn't really count for anything until it's done.
Yeah.
Right.
Choosing between them might be tough and everything, but the thing to remind yourself of is that it's not a matter of if, like if these get done, remind yourself that it's a matter of when. Like these other ideas, you're gonna make them. You got the rest of your life, man. Like these will happen. It's just one does have to come before the others. So.
And certainly, oh, go on.
I don't mean to interrupt. I'm really sorry. I am actually running a game right now. I know I look like I'm actually running a Pathfinder game, but they double booked me. I have to leave in about 5 minutes. So I know that you had a question. I think you had a question. Does anyone actually have a question specifically for me? Because if you do, I'd like to answer it before I leave.
Well, you might want to answer this. I just wondered if either or any of you use Scrivener because of its
No, I
organization.
don't. So I can't. Did you? What was your question? And
mine-
we will get back to both of them. I just want to make sure.
Mine was
before.
about multitasking, where if you're working on one project and suddenly you have an epiphany for another one, do you often just drop whatever it is you're working on and just jump to the other
I
project?
have done before now, yeah.
Yeah, so what I do is, and it actually came up, one of the problems with winning RPG Superstar is that every third-party publisher in Pathfinder wants you to work for them suddenly. They suddenly know who you are and you're on the map in a big way. So a lot of people were like just people I never even heard of. I mean, my Facebook went from like 500 to like 900 people in about 2 weeks. It was really crazy. But I mean, not quite that much. But I do have over almost 1,000 friends on
Wow.
Facebook now. And it is primarily because of that. So what happened to me was I had a bunch of people coming to me. And like I said, I work as a nurse. I mean, I have a very draining job. And I knew that my time freelancing was going to be very limited. So I try only to do 1 or 2 projects at a time because I don't want to leave anybody out there. So I've turned down far more work than I've agreed to do. But what happened was I did get into the place where I had 2 things I was working on, and one of them was really bogging me down. And I feel good about what I turned over, but for the longest time I hated it. I couldn't get into the character. I had been given a lot of stuff up front, but some of the information conflicted with some of the other information. And it was like, how do I give the person who's asked me to write this what they want when they don't even know what they want? So I did a lot of soul searching. I wrote the parts of it that I could. I lived with it for a long time. I cried. I mean, it was just very horrible in a way because I just couldn't bring out of me what I felt like was the best. And then I finally had this revelation. And it just finally happened. I finally was like, well, I'm looking at it wrong. And how am I going to look at it? But at the same time, I had other things going on. And so I was able to kind of I would just go back to it every so often and read what I had and read what they'd given me. And I would, try to turn the perspective. How can I make this about the cops chasing the Blues Brothers rather than the Blues Brothers? And that was finally how, and it'll be out soon. It was a Kickstarter, so it's no real surprise, but that I was asked to do one of these things. And it was, I'm like I said, I'm very happy with what finally happened. And I feel like it was a rewarding situation where I learned about how to kind of pace myself. But at the same time, it was sort of like sometimes you just have to write words down until they start to make sense.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't quite answer your question, but that was kind of, I did get into that place where I was like, oh man, I've got this one thing I really like working on, and I've got this one thing that I would really like to work on, but it's not working for me. But I don't have anything about the Scrivener, so I will let them talk about that if they do. But I'm going to go ahead and go catch my cab back to go kill some PCs. Thank you guys.
Yay. At various points in the Actung project, I was working on anything up to 6 different books, marshalling my own stuff for them, rewriting them, working with the authors, working with different people, editing them. So that can be very much a case of, well, okay, which one needs the most work, which one needs immediate work, which one needs, because we did have one book, bless them, the 2 authors were lovely, it had very little that needed doing to it. It became the forgotten child because it hadn't caused issues that needed immediately fixing. Otherwise, it was going to start causing problems further down the line. So you do kind of get that. I mean, at the moment, I am technically working on 4 different projects. And again, because I've been hired by third parties to do these, it's a case of, well, whose deadline is nearest?
That's realistically, that's kind of a big motivating factor. Like, which is first, and if they're real close, which is more important to you in terms of the person you want to, continuing to foster a relationship with.
Yeah.
That's kind of a shitty thing to say, but sometimes that's an influencing factor.
And sometimes, particularly with the two that I'm working on, two of the ones in particular at the moment, is the fact that I can do a bit, then it needs to go back to the author, and while I'm waiting for them to come back to me, I can go back to the other one, and I can fill in like that.
I've used that as a motivational tool too. So it's like I get this idea and I want to work on this other thing right now, but it's like this thing has a deadline that I need to work on. So I'm like, okay, if I get this thing done, if I push myself to get this thing done, I can go do the other thing that I really, really, really want to do. So that sometimes helps too. And
Stacy, move over here. I want you to talk more about this stuff.
Come here, Petal.
and I hold on to things. I mean, like I have Pinterest boards where I'll like the Lamentations thing is a great thing. It being set in 17th century is really cool because there's a ton of things that you can look at. And I had this idea for an adventure, and I had to go start looking for a city that it would be placed in, that it would make sense to be placed in. And when I found it, not only did I find the perfect place that had all these wild statues and all this kind of stuff going on, and had all this clockwork going on, because clockwork is a big part of this adventure. It was just like it was made for me, that it was there, but I'm not allowed to work on it until I'm done with what I'm working on right now. Yeah. So I just start throwing things on Pinterest that looked like they were interesting me, or throwing things in I use OneNote a lot. I'm throwing things in OneNote and keeping it there so that later, when I finally get to go look at it, I'll actually get to so it actually. It scratches that itch for me a little bit, that I want to work on it. So I've done a little bit of research. Okay, now I got to go back to this thing that I really have to finish.
And sometimes you really do just have something like it's burning a hole in your brain, and you just have to get it out there because you can't focus on anything else until you've just screen dumped the whole lot. And then it's sort of like you've cleansed your soul, and you can go back and do the other stuff, and it's still there waiting for you. But you've kind of you've exercised yourself, it's there.
Worst case scenario, if this is something for like a publisher or something like, or for your editor or something like, send a mail saying like, hey, this might be a little late because reasons.
Yeah, no, seriously, yeah, do that, please, because
always
having been in that,
with your like if you're doing something for like, okay, for instance, in RPGs, there's like Kobold Press, there's Endsider. God, I do so much work for Endsider. There's like various other sort of like there's also Paizo and WotC and everything. Like if you're doing freelance for them, and this overlaps with the freelancer panel I did this morning, or no, I didn't do it. I was there. Where just keep in contact with your editors and keep in contact with your things, being like, they usually budget more time beyond your own deadline. Just be sort of upfront and honest about delays, because they're usually understanding.
Right, yeah.
So if you gotta like. If there's one project that you feel takes more precedence and it's not the one that sort of needs to be worked on, let them know. Maybe don't mention it specifically, but just let them know. Work on the other one a bit until you feel that drive sort of fulfilled, I guess.
Yeah, that happens all the time. And as a project manager, I actually try to build in that little extra time that something's going to happen. And,
because anything that can go wrong will go wrong.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, my dad died just as all of the Acton Cthulhu stuff for the first 2 books came in. Suddenly and unexpectedly. So we had that. There was another one of the authors, his mum died during the project. We had people who were very, very seriously ill during it. And that all just sort of has a knock-on effect as it goes through. So yes, you do build time into projects to try and allow for that. But, people will be flexible. The whole thing is keep in touch. Don't disappear off the face of the earth. That's when it becomes a problem. Because people will attempt to accommodate you as much as they physically can if you are honest and you talk to them. If you vanish, refuse to answer their emails, just, completely cut yourself off from them, that's when people start to get frustrated and annoyed. And, I mean, one of the things as well that a lot of people in this industry treat it's a hobby because they do have a main income. But for a lot of other people, that is their main job. And the key thing is professionalism. Just because it's not your main job doesn't mean it isn't somebody's. Right. They are relying on you to be as professional as they are. And that's a really important thing.
Okay, so we've got about 10 minutes left.
I have a question for Ed and everything. What is like the dumbest idea that you've sort of had in your brain for a product or a book or something that you have just been like, no, I don't know, I should do that, or if you actually did, like, yeah, I'll do that. Like, I can turn that into something publishable.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know if I can answer that. Can you answer that?
I can actually, and it's one that I really wish we could have got. Back when I was very first working with Modiphius, there is. It's never going to happen, so I'm going to say it. There was a chance we were going to go for the Saints Row license and try and make a Saints Row role playing game, and we were going to try and do it with all the weird stuff and all the downloadable content for things you could add in, and that was just crazy, like real sack of ferret stuff. And I would have loved to have just been able to run riot with that, and just so you would have there's sort of like it was sort of like a game within a game, so the game would actually have been a bit of merchandise in the Saints Row universe, that it was the branded Saints Row role-playing game in the Saints Row world. And just that, I really so wanted to do that.
You were breaking my heart. I didn't know that was a thing, and now I want this thing that doesn't. Oh my God.
Sadly, it will never happen, obviously, because that's just completely dead in the water now as a franchise. But no, I really wanted
that happen. Oh, that's so sad. Wait, do I have an answer to my own question? Oh no, I do, because I have a book coming out for Lamentations of the Flame Princess. It's called Blood and the Chocolate. This is a D&D adventure that I've wanted to run, or just have and exist in some form for years. And the more I thought about it, I was like, I could probably self-publish it, and like I could do it maybe as good as Hell House Beckons, which is like okay for a first-timer. But James Radji, who does Lamentations of the Flame Princess, he was accepting pitches, and I was like, I'm going to pitch this to him. It's real different, but I feel like that's probably what he's looking for. And he was the first to come back to me and say, like, yeah, I want this book to happen. Like, I want to take your really dumb, stupid idea about, 17th century, like, thieves and rogues and adventurers and everything invading this sort of, this ultra-guarded chocolate factory in the middle of the southern Netherlands. Run by this Catholic Spanish woman and everything, who's a transplant from South America. And I just kept coming up with more stuff, like, what can I mine from the original film? What can I mine from the Johnny Depp, Tim Burton remake and everything? What can I mine from the original book and its sequel? Because there's just a treasure, like, Roald Dahl was just wonderfully mad about that kind of stuff. Yeah. And, like, I put it all in. Like, and James didn't say no. Well, no. The only thing he said no to was originally there was a supernatural angle to it, and he was like, no, just make the main villain, Lucia de Castillo. She's like a female version of Willy Wonka. And originally she was going to be like kind of possessed by a spirit of like an evil cocoa tree, and she's like, just make her evil. And I'm like, okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. She's just like an evil businesswoman. And in a time where like, because there's some industrial revolution stuff going on there with like the processes, I had to do a ton of research into like, how is chocolate made? How is chocolate made before it was actually chocolate? Because in the 17th century, like, there was bitter drinking chocolate and everything. Yeah. But like, I was like, no, I want chocolate bar. I want to be able to sell like all those weird confections and stuff. They didn't exist to the 19th century. Well, I can move stuff along so that there's these innovations. I can make that happen. Yeah, this was just the dumbest idea that I am, if it ever comes out, and hopefully it will before the end of the year, like, I am so blessed that people said yes to this, and that they continued to, throw money at it. So I think that's mine.
I have a question to follow up on that. So chocolate wasn't made before the 18th century.
Right.
Reality. So you moved your processes back in time.
Yes.
Instead of moving your story forward in time.
Well, the thing is, it needs to be, in order for James to be interested in it, it needs to take place between 1600 and 1620. Like, those 2 decades are kind of the sweet spot for his sort of, like, age of exploration, where, like, firearms technology is kind of getting started, and, like, pistols and arquebuses and everything, like, they exist, and they're becoming more and more prevalent, and it's, but you don't have all of the really modern conveniences of the 18th and 19th century.
So you had to fit it within the parameters of...
Yeah, I hand-waved it and everything. Like, there's this sort of mutant strain of cocoa that's grown in somewhere in the darkest Peru, where it's just this, like, gigantic tree that grows these cocoa beans that are the size of coffins. and the indigenous population and everything, the Peruvians there, are, grinding it up and eating it and everything. And it has this awful degenerative effect on them over time. So over the hundreds and hundreds of years that they've been doing this, they've slowly been sort of shriveling into these weird pygmy people. Lucia de Castillo comes out here and everything. She's the wife of a large plantation owner. She knows the business. She has she's a Spanish native, but she also has family in the Netherlands, which are, at the time, there's a civil war going on between the Catholics and the Protestants, because this is smack dab in the middle of the Protestant Reformation. So her husband dies of terrible disease. Their family dies of terrible disease. She's on her own. She inherits that plantation. For whatever reason, she ends up in the jungles and comes across this gigantic, somewhat sentient, latently magical cocoa tree. And this sort of weird race of tiny Oompa Loompa people that are basically serve it. So I'm like, okay. She's like, well, I just inherited a whole bunch of things, a whole bunch of land in the Netherlands that I can use. Screw it. I can exploit this. I'm going to uproot this entire tree. I'm going to take its entire population with me all the way over to Europe. And it turns out I can figure out a way to use this sort of weird, sort of latently magical cocoa and make it in a way where it's sort of semi-addictive, to the point where, suddenly in the timeline of this adventure, chocolate is becoming more widely used by the aristocracy and the nobles across Europe than gin, than alcohol, than tea.
Never.
It's not the thing. It's not making as much progress in England, but it's basically taking over France.
It was beautiful.
All right, we got to wrap up here. We got about 2 minutes left. Any last minute questions?
Ethel had one.
Have you ever fallen in love with an idea or a phrase or a character, and this is the sexiest, most wonderful thing you've ever thought of in your life, and you go and you work on this and you work on this, at what point do you throw it out when you realize, oh my God, that's actually crap, even though I've invested, or maybe not crap, it just isn't going to work, or it isn't right for this. How do you resolve that conflict when you're trying to create?
You do just have to kill your babies. You really do.
It's so hard.
Yeah, it is hard. I mean, very, very quickly, when I first started writing indie games, the first one I started writing will one day turn up. It's not out yet. The second one I did was Small Things, which is now in Seven Wonders. But the version of it that's in Seven Wonders is not the original version. That's kind of like the fourth version, or the fourth rules system attached to it. The first one was a variation of cogs, which we will use for something else. The second one was a round-robin thing, which is awesome and I will use for something else, but it wasn't quite what they wanted. The third one, we tried to do a hybrid system. God, it was awful. It was embarrassingly awful, and it just proved that sometimes compromise is not the way to go. And it was so obvious that it was terrible that it just went, no, that is, yeah. And then the fourth one came along, which they were really happy with, and that's the one that finally saw the light of day. But sometimes there is something that you are very close to, but deep down you know it's not right, and it does take a lot to just go, no. But again, at some point in the future, there will be elements of that you can pull out and reuse. So nothing is ever wasted.
You just put the baby in
cryogenic storage.
You put baby in the corner.
Oh, may you be forgiven.
Baby in the corner. No, I absolutely agree, because it's so hard. But the thing that I do is I have a very patient and, my girlfriend is, she's somewhat into game design. She has a really good head for that kind of stuff. When I have my multitude of terrible and dumb ideas, which is just constant, I run things by her. If I'm like, I don't know if this works, I really love this, but also I'm too close to it, I can't tell if it's stupid, because everything I make is stupid, but I love it, and I've been fortunate that other people like it too. And yes, sometimes an outside perspective is like, oh, this is really interesting, this is good, this doesn't kind of work, but that's my favorite thing. Well, no, it really doesn't work. An outside perspective can help a lot. But yeah, those ideas can persist and be in other things. Every adventure I've written every adventure and article that I've pitched to Insider, if it doesn't get accepted, or if a big chunk of it either gets cut out or changed and everything, it's turned up in other stuff that they've published. Because I'm like, well, I had this idea here that didn't fit, or I couldn't make it work. It's going in the next one in some form. So that's kind of the way I do it, I guess.
Take the baby out of cryogenics.
Yeah.
Thaw your babies.
All right. Well, that ties us up then. It's 2:01 p.m. So thank you everybody
Thank
for
you guys so
coming.
much.
Thank you.